A portion of today's video is sponsored by Nixie. Less than a decade ago, plenty of people were convinced that the handheld gaming market was dead. While it had its fan base, the 3DS didn't sell nearly as well as the original DS line of systems did. PlayStation cut off support of the PS Vita pretty quickly, and a lot of people were convinced that cell phones were the future of all portable gaming. Then, 6 years ago, the Nintendo Switch released, and ever since then, things have kind of flipped around. I think there are some arguments to be made that the Switch by itself is 100% the reason why handheld gaming is popular again, but it was a pretty massive signifier of it, and now we are seeing so many other handhelds begin to enter the market again. Whether that's one of the various emulation devices flooding the market, a number of PC handhelds, including some coming from now major established companies like Valve's Steam Deck and more recently the ROG Ally, or one of the most recent things we've seen pop up, cloud and remote play focused handhelds like the Logitech G Cloud, the Razer Edge, and most recently revealed, PlayStation's Project Q. And a sentiment that has been building more and more up over the past couple years, especially as the Nintendo Switch has not yet officially revealed any kind of successor, is whether or not Nintendo should be worried about the flood of handheld alternatives entering the market. This is something that happened a lot, especially with the Steam Deck in particular, where there was of course a lot of that dialogue going on of this being the Nintendo Switch killer because of how much more powerful the system was in comparison to the Nintendo Switch. And while some of that sentiment certainly began to die down once the Steam Deck released, I'm beginning to see it crop up more and more again as we're seeing a lot more handhelds revealed and announced. And the answer to this question in my mind, quite frankly, is no. I'm not saying this is some kind of just fanboy sentiment of Nintendo is always in the right and their handheld will always be one of the most popular things on the market. There's always room for competition, and it's a thing that I'm very happy to see happen. But the thing that I think gets missed a lot of times in these conversations, the things that get focused on, is the fact that what has made the Nintendo Switch popular has never been its hardware power. And before I get into why it's been successful though, I do want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Nixie. When it comes to Nintendo controllers, one of the all-time best was the original GameCube controller, so much so that people still use them to this day on the Nintendo Switch, and some have really wanted to see it come in a Joy-Con variation, just like these ones from Nixie. And I've actually done a full video reviewing these in the past if you want to check that out, but the kind of Cliff Notes version worth talking about is that these are GameCube style Joy-Cons that are designed to go on the left and right hand side of your Switch and have the button layout, the shape, the feeling of using a original GameCube style controller split in half down the middle to use on your Switch. Topping it off though, they do have a couple of their own unique special features, including the ability to swap out the gates. So if you want to have a traditional 8-directional style gate like the GameCube controller had, you can use that, or go with a more modern style approach with a circle gate. And there are also a pair of remappable back buttons that can be used to map different functions from the same side Joy-Con, so you can have easy ways of accessing certain buttons, giving you more refined control over how you play your game. Now, while you can use these connected directly to your Switch in handheld mode, you can also use them in a docked setup by combining them together with a central piece, turning it into a wireless controller to use with your Switch as well, still bringing that GameCube style feel. And just in case you're worried about stick drift, good news, these use Hall effect sensor sticks. Now, when the Nixie Wizard initially released earlier this year, it was only available in a single color option, which is the very iconic indigo, but now there actually are 2 more colors available if you prefer, with a black design and my personal favorite, platinum. Now again, I do have a dedicated video going more in depth on these, but if you're interested in grabbing one, there is a link posted down below in the description so you can check out for any of those 3 different colors. Even when the Nintendo Switch released, it was already a bit of an underpowered system, not that it mattered quite as much back then because again, there was no one else really investing in handheld gaming systems at the time. But the defining feature of what helped it make the success that it wasn't simply that it was a handheld, because obviously they had had a handheld right before then. It was the simplicity and fun pull of the gimmick it offered of being a hybrid system, which was not something we had really seen popularly pulled off yet. Some systems messed with it a little bit before. Sega did after all have the Nomad, which was probably a little bit too ahead of its time. But the gimmick of the Nintendo Switch, combined with its relatively lower price point compared to the more traditional gaming consoles at the time, and still to this day, combined with the first-party library on top of that, really helped cement its popularity right away. I don't think it's necessarily any of these things individually that can make that kind of thing happen. I mean, all you have to do is look at the Wii U, where it had a great library of first-party titles, evidenced by the fact that most of it has been ported over to the Switch and have had massive success there that they didn't have back on the Wii U. But the problem that the Wii U had, obviously, was marketing, how it was differentiated from the Wii, and ultimately just wasn't something that appealed to a lot of people because it wasn't really clear what it was. And this combination of the Switch's easily identifiable gimmick and having great first-party titles is really the thing that I think helps differentiate it from everything else coming to the market right now. Sure, you can talk about how powerful the Steam Deck or ROG Ally is in comparison to the Switch. You can talk about the kind of games and experiences that are accessible through cloud streaming devices if you have a strong enough internet connection. I mean, the idea of playing a PS5 game in the palm of your hand is a really cool thing if it's at the right price and provides a seamless enough experience for most people using it. But then you look at the Switch and its success, and even the most recent example of that, right, with Tears of the Kingdom. This is a massively well-reviewed, well-received game that is selling super strong, and it's ultimately running on 6-year-old underpowered hardware, and at the end of the day, guess what? That actually doesn't matter to most people. There's nothing wrong with enjoying having a more powerful system and being able to push games to higher frame rates and resolutions and performance, but it's just not the thing that actually is the selling point for the vast majority of people out there. And the Switch is helping to continuously prove that. Now, I'm not saying that Nintendo doesn't need to not release any kind of new hardware in the near future. There are definitely signs of momentum of the system slowing down. Nintendo themselves have acknowledged that the system did not sell as well as they were hoping to this past year. Not that it sold bad, just not what they wanted it to. And I think new hardware just for the sake of brand refresh and mind space is really important. But at the end of the day, the success that the system has had thus far and the strength of the first-party catalog, especially the Switch, has brought to bear, I think is really important to acknowledge and not ignore whenever there's these conversations about new handhelds entering the market. I mean, if you want to talk about the idea of raw performance versus fun, you can look at the history of systems like this and how that works out. The original Game Boy versus the Sega Game Gear, the Nintendo DS against the PSP. I think another thing worth noting too that's very interesting about this particular case right now with the Switch and a lot of the other systems coming out is that the Switch is the only one that really is actually its own focused hardware that comes from a manufacturer that has their own first-party stuff looking to fully focus and support it. Valve is a slightly similar situation with the Steam Deck because Valve obviously does have some of their own first-party games as well, but generally speaking, the Steam Deck is much more focused on being effectively a PC handheld that is running their own particular OS. The ROG Ally is literally a handheld PC that is running Windows 11. And when talking about cloud and remote play devices, those offer some interesting options, but the fact they don't natively play their own games put them in an entirely different situation as well. PlayStation's Project Q comes a little closer to this because, of course, you can play your PS5 exclusives on that system as well, but it's not really the same thing either because ultimately that is a remote play device that's not playing its own stuff natively. It is a side attachment, something that you buy in addition to a PS5. It is not its own standalone system. This isn't to say, by the way, that these things aren't cool in their own right. The Steam Deck is fantastic. I'm really interested in trying the ROG Ally, and while I still don't really fully get it, I'm gonna give Project Q a shot when it comes out. The main point I'm really trying to make here is that despite the increased interest we're seeing in a lot of more hardware handhelds coming out, none of them, as of yet, I think really make sense as a direct competitor to Nintendo Switch. Not in the same way that I think people try to talk about it sometimes. You know, I'd argue that when you look at things like Xbox versus PlayStation, that field is also beginning to change a lot because of the priorities of each company, but ultimately there is still somewhat of a logical argument of, well, look, these are two similar pieces of hardware that offer a lot of the same library. There are some exclusives to keep in mind. There are some differences in features and how their ecosystems work, but there is still a very clear sense of how they directly compete. And I don't think the Nintendo Switch currently really has something like that, even with all these new handhelds coming out. I mean, honestly, part of the reason why I do feel a little salty about the Project Q reveal recently is that I was really hoping that if Sony got back into the handheld market, they could be one of the companies to actually bring some kind of interesting direct competitor to Nintendo Switch, and that's clearly not the case right now. The point of this is the Nintendo Switch is cool, it's still cool, the Steam Deck's cool, Project Q is a thing that I'll try. The handheld market is just looking shinier and shinier, and I don't think it was one where the Nintendo Switch, as it currently is going to become irrelevant. It's just going to stand on its own pillar alongside these other ones, and I'm really excited to see what comes next from them, and what other companies might begin to throw their hats in the ring and try this out as well. So those are just some thoughts about the Nintendo Switch and all the new handheld hardware that's been coming out. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.